following program may contain unfiltered political discourse and opinions with which you may disagree. If that's not your thing, turn back now. Still here? Well, strap yourself in, folks, because you're about to get shell-shocked. It is...
It is 1 p.m. on this fine Tuesday.
Thank you, George.
And we'll start out with some wonderful announcements. Crossing the Caspian explores the golden age of artistic exchange between the Safavid Empire of Persia and Europe. The printings, drawings, miniature paintings, rare books, and maps were assembled from works created in 1500 to 1700 by artists from Antwerp, Amsterdam, Paris, Holstein, Qazvin, Isfahan, and Shiraz. Crossing the Caspian will be on display at the Cantor Art Center on the Stanford campus from now until April 26th. The museum is always free and open to the public. Hours and more are at museum.stanford.edu. That's museum.stanford.edu. Celebrating the 20th anniversary of Buena Vista Social Club, Stanford Live will present a free screening of the film on Tuesday, February 18th at 6 p.m. in Oshman Hall in the McMurtry building on the Stanford campus. Traveling from the streets of Havana to the stage of Carnegie Hall, the documentary captures a forgotten generation of Cuba's brightest musical and talents. For more info, call 650-724-2464. That's 650-724-2464. Scholarship America believes that every student, regardless of financial status, deserves an opportunity to go to college. Since its founding, Scholarship America has distributed more than $4.2 billion to 2.5 million students nationwide. It supports a number of leading programs, including Dollars for Scholars. You can help make a difference in the lives of students. To learn more, visit scholarshipamerica.org. That's scholarshipamerica.org. Okay, now it's time to get down to business.
Right. This is Shellshocked with your host, DJ Trump, living rent-free in your head. I'm here with my good friend George to talk about some of the issues of the day.
Okay, so what are we going to talk about, DJ?
All right, well, I'm thinking of talking about the coronavirus. That seems to be something that's quite a sick story.
Yeah, that seems to be quite a plague on our country.
Yes.
Mainly on the Chinese, but I think our country has unfortunately suffered as well.
Yeah, last I heard, there were a couple cases on the West Coast. Seattle seems to be one of the areas of concentration, but it's spreading across much of the world. And it's difficult to say how viral it is now. I mean, there seems to be a couple hundred cases in Wuhan that have been confirmed, but simultaneously the Chinese government is infamous for repressing information. And there's some reports on the ground that are very difficult, if almost impossible to verify, that suggest that the number might be even higher, like tens or hundreds of thousands. And some of the supporting evidence to that is the fact that like the entire province surrounding Wuhan with over 56 million people has been quarantined and public transportation has been shut down, which seems like a pretty extreme step to take, unless this is a much worse outbreak than we've been led to believe.
Yep, and that's definitely a possibility. It could be pretty bad, unfortunately.
Right, so it seems that, like most epidemic viruses, this originated from animals. It's a disease that originated in another species and might have caused a much more mild infection, but made the jump to humans and is attacking us far more virulently than it would the normal host species. And it's very negative. It seems to largely come from bats. I mean, that seems to be the strand related to the coronavirus, but there are some people speculating there might have been an intermediate vector, particularly in snakes. Regardless, it was most likely an animal sold in one of the open markets at Wuhan itself.
Yeah, that sounds like typical Chinese manner of doing things.
If you want to get into a bit more of I don't want to say conspiracy because it's not exactly right, but highly speculative behavior. There's some people who are perhaps wondering if this might have been related to some like biowarfare research in China. Like that's again going way beyond what anything we know. But it's worth speculating considering just how little data we're getting out of the situation. Regardless, even if it's just like an organic strain of a particularly deadly virus, it seems to be potentially very bad. We've had similar scares in the past with things like SARS. However, I don't know. I wasn't alive. I wasn't as aware back in those days, back in the early 2000s, of such scares. And to my eye, this seems pretty serious.
I would say it seems pretty serious to me as well. The concern I have is just that, we, just in a very globalized world, it's going to be difficult for us to keep these people who have this virus and who contract it from coming to the United States. We already have some here. I think there's a case in Orange County. There's a case in San Francisco. So particularly the latter is concerning for us because I, for example, was just in San Francisco yesterday. So, it's not a It's something that you might run into, unfortunately.
Right. I'm also hyper aware of the dangers of disease right now because I just sort of overcame the flu right in time for the coronavirus to kill me. So that's always fun. And I mean, that's a little bit worrisome. I'm particularly worried about some parallels I see with Ebola. I mean, particularly the origin in a bat species, but also seemingly the high level of transmission between the infected and the caregivers and the first responders. It seems like a lot of the people who have been confirmed as fatalities in China seem to be tied to their hospitals, like surgeons and medics. And that creates problems because even if the disease itself isn't as directly fatal, if people stop going to work in those crucial services, then other medical personnel and facilities start shutting down and other diseases themselves start becoming more rampant, so you even have a higher death rate still.
Yep.
So, I mean, I'm very worried that this could lead to some pretty serious societal problems because we've seen the damage Ebola can do. So if coronavirus has any of those characteristics, like even to a lesser degree, that could still be very worrisome.
Yeah, and I think the other problem that coronavirus would have that Ebola might not is that, I mean, Africa is, West Africa, like where Ebola originated, is less connected to the world. So, I mean, yes, it's poorer, but also partly as a function of that, it's more contained. The problem with China is that it has a lot more global economic connection. So, people are going in and out of it. And sure, there's a transport quarantine on the whole state around or region around it, but that doesn't mean that that's everything there. And, there may be coronavirus outside of that already. And
there definitely is.
We've already confirmed that. And also, that, quarantine may not even totally be observed. So I'm not sure how, if that's going to be enough. And the fact that China just has connections everywhere and exports and imports things all over the place makes things a little bit more concerning.
I'd sort of make the devil's advocate case, though. I mean, one thing you can say about China that you can't say about West Africa is that it's a more politically cohesive unit. I mean, we've complained in the past on both of our programs about the dangers of Chinese authoritarianism. However, one thing that's very interesting is if you look across cultures, authoritarian political attitudes seem to track very highly with the level and virulence of infectious diseases, partially because people are more likely to turn over authority to a government when they fear that their life is in immediate danger, but also because governments with wide authoritarian powers have an easier time committing quarantines. So, I mean, like many of the worst areas of Ebola outbreaks happen in war-torn regions where there are multiple factions that are fighting over one another and foreign aid can't get in. So, I mean, hopefully, for all of its horrible activities, the Chinese government is actually able to do something right and just crack down on this and make sure it doesn't spread any further than it already has.
Yep. That I think is a reasonable interpretation of this issue. So what do you think is the long-term, way to solve this problem?
Well, I mean, the long-term solution to, like, the human war on disease is a bit of a broad topic. I do think that
this particular problem, I would say.
Like this particular coronavirus?
Yes.
Well, I mean, in the short term, I think that the quarantine is a relatively good idea. I do think that you still need to be delivering emergency services in Wuhan. I do think that you need to monitor the sick. I mean, if we could start using artificial intelligence in order to sort of anticipate its spread and use the relationship, that might be helpful. I mean, I'm not exactly certain all the new epidemiological tools that we're getting out of these new technological developments, but, yeah, using a lot of buzzwords there, folks. But
yeah, there you go.
Right, but regardless, I think that we need to use the full brunt of all of our abilities to, track the spread of the disease and make sure that people, don't come into contact with the infected any more than necessary, and then the affected are given whatever treatment we can give them. I do think that to the extent that this came just from transmission via, a food market, maybe eating improperly, cooked bats might not be a good solution, and like maybe if we could move away from those out of our diets.
Yeah, I think in general,
a long-term solution.
Perhaps having some sort of regulation in food markets. Obviously China has regulation everywhere else. Now, why they can't manage to regulate their food markets is comical.
The Chinese black market for exotic animals is actually a well-known phenomenon. It's one of the beguiling features of conservationists around the world because many people, there's a lot of Chinese folk religion involving, the consumption of certain animal genitalia or animal,
and a lot of these tend to be endangered species, which is unfortunate.
Yes. So, I mean, that's a related phenomenon. But I mean that gets around international treaties. So the fact of the matter is that a legal solution might not be the best way. I do think you have to just have a culture of, maybe not eating all this garbage because there's a high possibility that might kill you. Or if you're going to eat bats, which is not something I would endorse, maybe that's a cultural bias, but I just don't think they're that appetizing.
Yeah.
Like you could at the very least cook them properly, not boil them alive in soup, but maybe not get the job done all the way.
Yeah.
And I mean, in the meantime, I do think that aside from, maybe changing some of our dietary habits, I would recommend for long term, a huge part of health is nutrition and lifestyle. So get enough sleep, make sure that you're eating well, take care of yourself, and make sure your immune system is as strong as possible so that if something comes by, you're going to be able to fight it off as best as you can.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, that's sort of my PSA to anybody who might be listening in the Bay Area and who might be at risk of infection. Wash your hands, eat well, get your fruits and veggies, sleep 8 hours a night, or however long you need. It could be 7 to 9. Some people can get by on less. Some people need more. So know yourself and take care of yourself. Because a stitch in time saves 9. You can get yourself out of a lot of trouble if you just take a couple preventative measures.
Absolutely. I would entirely agree with that, and I think that we need to make just logical steps a priority, and authoritarian countries like China especially should be able to make some of these changes from the top down. In the U.S., obviously, we need to make it from the bottom up, and that's when elite pressure, through media campaigns, through actors, famous people making appeals. That's how we can do it here.
All right, I do think in general, though, that, the value of preventative medicine is really undervalued in the United States. This is sort of going off on a tangent a bit, but, we have an incredibly overweight population, and that creates a lot of stress on the immune system. Your body's not meant to carry that much fat. And, obesity is shown to have some carcinogenic effects. It's built to really strain the heart.
Obesity is connected to diabetes, heart disease, all kinds of early mortality.
Heart disease, stroke, cancer, the leading killers of the Americans.
Yeah.
So,
joint damage, things like that.
And so in general, I do think that as a culture, we do need to start taking our individual health more seriously and not always see it as a government responsibility. Healthcare is not just making sure that you can, get treatment. That's important. But what's even more important is being able to have the clairvoyance to avoid needing treatment in the first place.
Yeah, to
whatever extent you can, minimize the.
As you mentioned, a stitch in time saves 9. I think another thing related to that, and this is an issue that I think is important, we need to remind people of this responsibility by getting the government out of healthcare. People, because the government is involved in healthcare, at least partly, believe that the government is going to solve their problems, and it can't. If you eat like a pig, if you do not exercise, if all you eat are sweets, you aren't going to be healthy, and that's not something that any medicine or any pill or any regimen of mumbo jumbo is going to fix. You're going to have to change your diet, and I think that when the government is involved so heavily in healthcare, there's this assumption that the outside, they have an external locus of control, especially with respect to healthcare. You need to have an internal locus of control. You need to remember your health is your responsibility, but it's also your privilege. You have the ability to change it. Not only is it your job, but also you can change it. All you have to do is start being healthy, and the government can't give that to you, but also can't take it away. So I think that the issue is just having the government pay for Medicare, Medicaid, all this other stuff. It gets people, in the idea that it makes them think they're powerless and helpless, and it also makes them think that it's the government's job to worry about their health, and they just need to be doing whatever else they're doing. When, this culture of personal irresponsibility is not only morally deficient, but it's also pragmatically a disaster.
All right, so I'd also like to put forth that personal liberty and personal responsibility go hand in hand. To the point where if you compromise one, the other will inevitably follow. So if you're no longer having people being personally responsible for their own healthcare choices, if you're having government subsidies, then that's going to create a lot of political resentment because the people who are paying for everyone else's healthcare are going to start making demands on the lifestyle choices of other people in order to minimize costs.
Yeah, and again, that reduces that does definitely compromise liberty.
Right. So for example, that might be a common justification used by conservatives and other people for opposing the legalization of many intoxicating substances is that people are going to damage their own bodies, and we're going to need to take care of them. Like, I mean, if you're just sitting around drinking or smoking all day, that causes a lot of negative health effects on your body. And if you're a self-supporting adult who's paying your own bills, you're willing to take your own risks and assume your own costs, people have a lot less of a problem than if you say, I'm going to make bad decisions and you're going to bear the consequences of them. Well, if I'm going to bear the consequences, I'm not totally comfortable with letting you make all the decisions. And that's a problem because, I mean, in an ideal society, we all should be responsible for our own decisions because by taking risks and making decisions, we see who succeeds and who fails, and we make progress as a society. As you know, we reward success and we penalize failure. When you obfuscate those market signals, you start penalizing people who are being successful and making good choices by having them subsidize the people who make bad decisions in any sphere of human activity, be it health, be it finances. I mean, like, we could go on and on. Like, that creates a lot of problems. Furthermore, however, I do think that we should start giving some practical advice rather than just, insulting people, because the sad reality is people expect a quick fix and they expect a glamorous solution, but very often, if you're making any kind of self-improvement, be it, financial or physical or otherwise, it's probably going to be a gradual process. It's not going to be very romantic. It's going to be a lot of discipline. It's going to be a lot of small choices that pile up over time. Like, realistically speaking, for example, if you're substantially overweight, that causes a lot of problems. You can realistically expect, if you're, like, serious about going on a diet, to lose maybe a pound or two a week. Like, tops. Like, if you try and go faster than that, you're probably not going to be able to stick to the diet because you
won't be able to stick to the diet. And the other thing is, like, it may be bad for your health even if you do stick to it. Yeah, I think you just need to remember that it's a difficult road. Let's say that you're 50 pounds overweight. If you want to lose that weight, sustainably and in a way that isn't going to compromise other parts of your health, that's going to take you the better part of a year. And I think that it's important for people to remember how much work it is to solve a problem and then perhaps to be a little more motivated not to let it get so bad. On the other hand, though, we do need to remind people that, let's say you're 50 pounds overweight. If you even lose 10 pounds,
yeah, that's massive.
A lot of research suggests that losing that amount of weight, even as little as that is, can reduce your health problems by a reasonable amount, by a noticeable amount.
Right. So, I mean, incremental progress is still progress. I think
yes.
that you have to set realistic goals for yourself. You need to know what you can expect. You need to know what your capabilities are. But you also need to, feel some reward when you actually make progress to that goal. If you want to lose 50 pounds in a year and in the first month you lose 5, that's good progress.
If you lose 5 in the first month, then you're slightly ahead of schedule.
Yes, you are.
And I think that at that point you can be like, if I keep doing this, then I can be done in 10 months. And that's, then I get to, be fully where I want to be health-wise, or at least with respect to weight,
right,
in 10 months rather than a year. And I don't have to worry. I don't have to be, restricting my diet so aggressively for, quite as long, right?
Right. So, I mean, I would recommend for most people, count your calories. There are a lot of... that's relatively easy to do. There are apps for that. I mean, there are also calculators. You can figure out what your daily energy expenditure is. And you can exercise a little bit more to raise that number. And on top of that, like, there are about 3,500 calories in a pound of fat. I mean,
yes.
So you're going to need to run a deficit of about 500 calories a day to burn a pound a week. There's some water weight you can expect to lose as well. That's not affiliated with the fat itself. But a pace of about a pound a week is doable if you're willing to, run it. And you can also make some dietary changes in order to, make yourself stick to the plan a little bit better. I think a lot of people don't eat nearly enough fiber. Fiber is very filling.
Yeah.
It doesn't have any caloric value, which is why a lot of people aren't super keen on it, because it doesn't have any calories in itself. It slows sugar absorption, which is good. It gives your liver a bit of an easier time.
It also, I guess depending on how grotesque you want to get it, it cleans you out essentially, which is important actually.
Okay, because being regular is very important. Yes.
Well, in terms of your digestive health, it's important to have parts of or amounts of fiber just to make sure that things do not build up. That's actually arguably part of polyps. It can result in things that in some cases are cancerous, in some cases are just gross and reduce your digestive efficiency. So it's just not good for you not to have it. People need to remember that, well, yes, it does fill you up, and that's good. It satiates you, but it manages your sugar absorption, but it also more practically keeps you cleaner, which is good. It's healthier just to make sure that you're getting enough of that. And another dietary thing that I would recommend is move away from really high carbohydrate foods for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of them do have a lot of the simple sugars and such, which that can, in extreme cases, lead to diabetes, but even in less extreme cases, just reduce your regularity of energy. It can cause you to have sugar highs and sugar crashes, and it's just not great. Also not great for your teeth, obviously. And then just having more protein and fat. Protein helps build and maintain your muscles, which is important. Fat also can be digested more slowly, and that's great. And it also has fat-soluble vitamins. And if you don't have fats, you don't get those vitamins.
One thing that fat's also really important for is the maintenance of hormone levels, particularly if you're like working out, for example. You need a certain amount to keep testosterone levels high, which is important. I mean, that's one of the hormones that is an androgen. It helps, manifest masculine traits, but it also helps building muscle and with risk-taking behavior. And it's also really important to male health generally, to the male audience. So, I mean, females have some testosterone, much smaller levels. That's relatively important to them as well. So, most hormones have a fat component. So fat should probably be about 20 to 30% of your diet. I mean, I've heard some people say as high as 40%.
I would say 30% is usually considered the right amount, because lower than 30 is not great. A lot higher than 30 is not great. Yeah, you kind of want to be around there. Other thing is that, particularly for men, get rid of soy. Soy is not good for you. It really, for women even, it can be excessive. Like, there's just too much in the American diet, and especially in other Asian diets have problems with it too. It's because it's become a bit of a fad, this idea that, you're replacing meat, woo-hoo-hoo. If you're going to replace meat, replace it with other beans. Black beans are great.
Lentils are great, yes.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these are good. It's just soybeans also have a lot of omega-6s, which manifest as storage fat. So, I mean, you end up just having a lot of fat that isn't conducive to using for energy. It's conducive to being stored, and that's actually, at least according to some studies, partly responsible for American obesity. Another thing is that for men particularly, it has a lot of phytoestrogens. So,
I mean, there's a bit of a divided literature on this. I do want to make that clear because, there are a lot of test studies in mice, for example, that indicate that it suppresses levels of testosterone, but mice also process endocrine hormones like testosterone specifically and phytoestrogens very differently than we do. So phytoestrogen is sort of like a plant equivalent of an estrogen, which is why it's called a phytoestrogen. And there are some indications in some studies that it might suppress, androgens in males when consumed. But at the same time, a meta-study, I think the current body of literature seems to suggest that you have to have very high levels of phytoestrogen consumption to meaningfully affect your testosterone levels for men. So, I don't want to totally deny your opinion, because it is true that there are some studies that suggest that what you say is true, that by eating soy, that kills your testosterone levels.
It does. I don't think it. Yeah, and to be clear, I never argued that it killed it. I just argued that
I got a little bit
that particularly for men, it's not a great thing to have a lot of it. Again, a little bit of soy isn't going to kill you, but again, as I mentioned, also there's the whole fat issue as well. So it's not just about the phytoestrogens, though that doesn't help. But yeah, in all honesty, like a lot of these things, and I think make the good point here. This show isn't even about nutrition. This show is really about a lot of issues that don't get a lot of airtime otherwise and need to be discussed, and also about, I think, personal responsibility. So we can tie this back to conservative principles. The idea is people should be doing this research on their own. People should be educating each other about it as good friends and good family members. And then we shouldn't have these healthcare crises or whatever, because you wouldn't have so much obesity, you wouldn't have so much diabetes, you wouldn't have so much heart disease, you wouldn't have so much of any of this garbage. You wouldn't have so many knee problems and whatever if people would just eat properly.
And I would also recommend exercise. That pairs well with eating well, because garbage in, garbage out. If you have bad fuel, you're not going to be able to do very much. But simultaneously, it makes you look better, it makes you feel better, it makes you more confident in your body's abilities. You know what it can do. And it can also be a great opportunity to bond, socialize, meet people. So I would definitely recommend physical exercise. I think we as a society are moving away from that. I remember reading some studies a couple years back indicating that even the U.S. Army and the military are starting to be concerned that because children are spending more time playing video games, which are awesome, by the way, as somebody who grew up on video games, that because they're getting less physical activity and less physical exercise, we might actually be in danger of not having enough able-bodied men to draft in the event of a massive emergency.
Obesity is the single largest reason, pun intended, that young men are declared ineligible for the draft. I believe the next biggest reasons are having a conviction on the record and not having graduated high school. But
and I think the third, another big reason is a lot of substance abuse. I think particularly marijuana, which is controversial.
Yeah. In any case, overall, it's something like 70% of men of drafting age are not eligible to be drafted for various reasons. So,
right, which makes it really awkward for the 30% of us who are left by process of elimination.
Yeah, it's a problem. It's in any case, that is a national security threat. And actually, his name slips my mind, but one of the bigger, I think he may have been part of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was some sort of significant Army general in the Obama administration, and he gave a TED Talk actually about this very issue. He studied anatomy as part of some requirement because he had to do it because he had to take a role that required him to understand anatomy. So he ended up, basically doing a dissection of a cadaver, and he had an obese cadaver. He named the cadaver Charlie, I think, or something like that. And this had been an obese smoker who died in his 40s. And he looked at, he couldn't even find the heart. It was just buried under layers of fat. Everyone else could with their cadavers, but he had trouble finding it. The blood vessels were like, guitar strings. It was just, this is what happens to your body when you do all of these things that are bad for it. So I think that people need to realize that you can't blame the government for your smoking habit or your, inability to control your eating or your laziness or your other drug use. It's just it's not true. And I think that not only for the good of the individual, but also for the good of the country, for everyone's good, there needs to be more of a culture of personal responsibility and personal agency. People need to realize, yes, you do have the power to solve these problems. I think a lot of people have just sort of given up on, I'm just going to be fat and whatever. It doesn't have to be that way if you don't want it to be.
Worse than giving up. There are certain people who celebrate it almost.
Fat positivity. Oh, Lizzo?
Okay, let's not even get into that. I know we've gotten in hot water in the past, but bad music and bad body standards are being promoted.
Well, yeah. People are glorifying fat women's bodies particularly, and it's just, I don't know.
Nobody cares about how fat men feel about themselves.
Yeah, honestly, I'm glad that at least only it's limited to one sex, this fat positivity, but I don't see why it needs to exist at all. Why do we?
You're effectively advocating for killing women if you think that body positivity healthy at any weight. It's not true.
No.
There are people. What is true, I'll give them this, is that there are different frames, there are different body types. Certain people carry fat in different places, and also certain people with different bone structures, so that they're going to look a little bit different. So not everybody has to look exactly the same. But what's not true is that if you're at 45% body fat, you're not healthy.
No, if you're at 45% body fat,
you're morbidly obese.
Yes.
That doesn't change. You're not special enough to break the rules of thermodynamics. Calories in, calories out, control.
Well, not just that. You're also not special enough to break the very negative hormonal impacts.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That having all that fat causes.
Right. So we can talk about healthy ranges, and men, as you get older, the percentage of body fat goes up a little bit because more of it surrounds your organs, and that's supposed to be slightly healthier. Generally, if you're a man, you want to probably be between 10 and 20%. You can be below 10% if you're training really hard, but that's very difficult for a casual person to maintain.
But below 10 is fine. Yeah, for men. For women, it's not so
5
good.
Is essential fats. You can't go
five
below 5.
Is about as you don't want to go much below that. For women, it's
13 to 15% essential fats.
Yeah, for women, under 10 is not good.
Under 10 is bad. Under 10 is bad. Under 10 for them is danger zone. They probably want to be between 18 and 25%.
Well, yeah, 25% is the maximum you want for women. And for men, again, you want no more than 20.
Right. So, that's a pretty good benchmark. Body mass index is a bit more complicated. It's a rough estimate. It's just your weight based on your height. It's an equation. You take those two variables, you put it in, you get a number. If it's below 18.5, you're considered underweight. If it's above 25, you're considered overweight. If you're between that, you're considered average. But the problem is it doesn't take into account types of body mass. If you have an inordinate amount of muscle, for example, that's probably not a serious problem. If anything, you.
On the other hand, if there are a growing number of people who are technically by fat percentage obese but underweight or even just over fat or whatever, but underweight compared to by BMI. So that's an interesting contrary to that. So yeah, again,
so if you're an athlete, you look at a BMI and you have 26, 27, you know who you are. And if you have a BMI of 24, but you look in the mirror and you cringe, you know who you are too.
Yes.
So, I mean, take care of yourself. Like, that's all we're really saying. Like, I don't want to have to take care of you. I don't want you to have to take care of me. But I'm going to give you some tough love because I actually do, in a benevolent sort of way, care about the various masses of humanity enough to tell you, like, I can't.
The various masses of humanity. That's a good pun. There we go.
I wasn't even going for that one. Thanks for catching that. But I mean this genuinely. It's like I'm not going to tell you sweet lies in order to make you feel better about yourself. I'm going to tell you the truth. The truth is you got to work at, maintaining your life in order for everything to operate properly. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the simple pleasures of a donut or ice cream or, staying up all night playing video games. But those aren't the life decisions that are going to make you happy and healthy in the long term. So
No,
part of being an adult is being able to, regulate your intake of dopamine and pleasure and just, like, focus on getting the essentials out of the way first. And, like, maybe if some time left over, maybe you can indulge every once in a while, but it shouldn't be your default mode of being.
Yeah, and I think this comes to another issue, which is like maturity, and this is the idea that you need to take responsibility for your own actions. On that note, I actually have a couple other topics that I think I'd like to hear from the good DJ about.
I mean, I'd love to talk about peach mints, but at the same time, we can put that off if you have something more pressing.
No, we can. Well, we'll talk about peach mints later because we've got some good time. But let's talk about on campus. Let's talk about personal responsibility and the lack thereof on campus.
Oh, God, this is going to get spicy.
Yeah, I agree. This is going to get spicy. But I was talking, I have an interview recorded that will be playing tomorrow morning about grad student life and, grad student personal responsibility, issues that grad students face.
Is this of our mutual friend Scott?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
and
he and I complained about Star Wars, and we talked theology at length on Martin Luther King Day. It was a great time. I'll try and get that recording and post it up on my website. So.
Yeah, that's great. And, okay, so on that note, I'd like to talk about what some of the same issues, but maybe from a more undergrad perspective, because I already heard from a grad student. I'd like to hear from a fellow undergrad. What do we think about all this mental health stuff on campus? All these ideas that mental health is not being provided for enough by the administration, that the community is not supportive enough, that all these, suicides that we've seen in the past couple of years are somehow Stanford's responsibility.
I mean, on one hand, I think that any kind of self-care being practiced is good, so people being conscious of the fact that they have mental issues is a positive development. I do think the entitlement, like the idea that other people have to provide it for you, I mean, I do think that as friends and as a functional community, we should be looking out for each other to some extent, but at the same time, personal responsibility is paramount. So, like, if you have depression, for example, you should be able to, note that and try and take some appropriate measures, although that condition is particularly difficult because it kills your motivation to do anything. But, I mean, I don't think it's unreasonable if we have, like, professional health experts to the extent that any, like, college sophomore can be a, health expert who are living in the dorms with you. It might not be totally unreasonable to ask them to help you spot that and, like, give you advice.
Yeah. I guess
it's like, how much do we want to demand out of the RAs? How much do we want to demand out of the staff?
So I guess one other thing I've been looking at, and this is actually something that Stanford is considering and is being considered in one of the classes that is offered in the CS department, an ethics class called CS 182. There's apparently some risk management software under consideration, an algorithm that would be used by the school to basically take in information about different students, all the students, and to check on how they are supposed to be doing mentally and whether there need to be interventions. The idea would be to collect data on them and to...
That's a little bit Orwellian. I don't like...
Yeah, I would agree. I'm definitely skeptical of it.
And I don't really like any organization collecting data on me without necessarily my consent in order to determine whether or not they can hold me or force an intervention upon me. I mean, I understand that it might come from compassion, but at the same time, this sounds somewhat similar to me to, like, red flag laws, for example, where somebody might flag you down as a danger to yourself or others without good evidence and, take away some of your fundamental rights. I mean, in the general case of flag laws, that would be your gun rights. But when I think unlawful imprisonment or, suspension of certain privileges, I mean, even within the university, based on insufficient evidence or based on evidence improperly gathered, is still a pretty serious problem.
Oh, I agree. And I think that on top of that, it would really be... I think it also comes down to a misunderstanding of whose responsibility mental health is. I don't think it's the university's responsibility even to have to take this. Because keep in mind, I don't think they really want to have to do this. I think it's that they're being pressed to deal with all of these people's mental health problems, and this is the solution they've come to, or they're at least considering. So I think we need to realize, yes, it would be wrong of them maybe to start collecting this data, but it's wrong even to expect them to solve the problem that this is expected to solve.
Okay, I don't think it's fair to have them entirely solve the problem. However, I will push back a little bit, since they do collect, health insurance through Cardinal Care, and since they do have healthcare facilities on campus, like Vaden, I don't think it's unreasonable for them to have physical and mental health care facilities if they're charging students for both, and have some on-campus resources. I mean, how far that extends is a legitimate conversation, and I don't think that they're responsible for everything. I do think self-care is incredibly important, as we've discussed at length. But at the same time, I don't expect the school to make good dietary decisions for every student, but I do expect them to offer the choice.
To offer good dietary options.
Right. Like what? I don't expect a kid to, I don't expect them not to allow kids to buy Snickers, but I do expect them to at least offer apples and bananas at the same store. I mean, because they control the store. And as members of the Stanford community, as cringe-inducing as some of the rhetoric surrounding that can be at times, I don't think it's unreasonable to say, hey, this is something we care about. I want to buy apples and bananas because you at least cater to me and my needs as well.
Yeah,
or it's
I agree.
So it's if you're paying a certain amount of money to get into this school, to go to this school, and you're paying specifically for healthcare services, thousands of dollars sometimes, I don't think it's unreasonable to say, if you're going to charge me for these services, at least provide services that I actually need.
Oh, yeah, sure. And I think that Cardinal Care should cover some of this stuff because, again, it's expensive. I'm not on it, fortunately, but, there are people who are, and it's a real financial pain. But I think that, I guess my issue is that I agree that the options should be there insofar as it's a reasonable expense and it's reasonable given what they're charging. My problem is I think people hold them responsible for outcomes. That's my issue.
Okay, that is
I think that giving people the opportunity, within reason, to pursue those treatment options on campus or even off campus if that is something reasonable or desirable, that's one thing. The issue is they're holding Stanford. A lot of these protesters, have you ever seen them in White Plaza? Sometimes they're there.
I mean, honestly, usually when I see people screaming at White Plaza, I go the other way.
Yeah, I was going to say, they're sometimes there. They've written a lot of op-eds and stuff.
I mean, I've read some of the op-eds.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a general sense that they think that the university should do more in order to provide for mental health care.
Yeah, to me, the issue is it seems as though they hold the university responsible for these outcomes when I don't really think that's fair or honest or logical. I think the issue is that, sure, the university may have bad services and whatever. Okay, fine. Perhaps try to find ways to make those better. But certainly, I don't want to go down this route where the university is held responsible for the outcomes. Because, one, it could easily manifest itself in an Orwellian manner, just as we discussed. But more broadly, the university is a university. It is here to educate people, not to solve their mental health problems. And I think we need to remember, why are we here? We are here to study. We're not here to be emotionally vulnerable all the time and expect someone else to solve all our problems.
All right, one thing I would also like to put forward, as mental health, and as physical health, we talked a lot about how self-care and preventative care especially, is very important. I think mental health, there's an analog to that because, people don't always, descend straight away into mental illness. There's often sort of this gradual descent of tensions and their problem areas. And I do think that as individuals, we can be conscious of this. And I think having more awareness of what gets us into trouble and avoiding that can be very good. So, I think in general, what are the problems that people experience? They tend to have very high stress lives, which is going to be kind of inevitable if you're going to Stanford. If you're taking particularly a heavier course load, particularly in the harder sciences, you're going to be taking a lot of work in a relatively short amount of time. I think that comes with the quarter system to a certain extent because you're taking more courses in a smaller amount of time. We do have to either look at, strengthening our students so they can take that kind of load, understanding that is to be expected, or maybe tweaking the system. Maybe a semester system would be less stressful. I don't know. I'm just ping-ponging.
I'm actually a pretty big fan of the semester system, I will say. I think that the quarter system has a lot of problems. I think one of the big problems, and I can see how this problem I'm about to mention could actually result in mental health issues. Or, not maybe create them entirely, but exacerbate them or allow them to manifest in people who might be susceptible to them but might not have them yet. I think the issue that once people get behind, it's very difficult to catch up in a quarter system because you only have 10 weeks. So, I mean, if you screw up in the beginning of the quarter in a class, it's very hard to make up ground, and you're just going to be almost in some ways condemned to a bad result. I can see that being an issue. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but to me...
I mean, it does, yes. But I don't know if that's the total solution, because I am not an expert on, the timing of academic curricula and how to best structure a schedule to educate people in an optimal manner. Maybe switching from a quarter to a semester system would reduce stress. I mean, that seems pretty logical to me, but again, this is a lot more out of my depth than nutrition. And I'm not even a nutritionist by any means.
But you know more about that, yeah. I guess to me, that is one thing I will concede that I think Stanford could do, or could consider doing to make a lot of the stress at here be a little bit less. Now, granted, I think a lot of people's stress is not purely academic. I think there are often... things, more broader questions. I mean, or it's not purely based on the courses they're in. It might be, am I even studying the right field? My parents want me to be pre-med, but I don't want to be pre-med.
And some of that angst is unavoidable. It's not something the university can do for you.
I know, I agree. The university certainly cannot solve it for us. But I think also it's important to note that some of these problems, even if they tried, it might not be...
we could just have a caste system again. Okay, so you're going to study pre-med, you're going to study pre-law, you're going to be an architect, you're going to be an engineer. I guess you're the unfortunate soul that's going to have to take gender studies to keep that department going.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that definitely the quarter system's one thing. I think another thing is, you mentioned preventative care. One of the big problems, and Stanford, I think, has had a ham-handed, though I think genuine attempt to solve this issue. People don't have a lot of community in some cases, especially the grad students, but even undergrad sometimes. So, I mean, I see that they're trying to have all these events in order to give people an opportunity to interact with each other. But
I see some things, like Cardinal Nights, for example, which is supposed to be their alternative to drinking.
I think some of those events are kind of fun. I've been to some of them, the pick your own movie night, when they go to sports games, that's good, and I think that helps. I think those are things that, quite frankly, expanding them, I don't know how much that'll help people with issues. I know as somebody who really hasn't suffered from any issues, but certainly could often use a little bit of fun things to do, I'm not going to complain about them. Right. I think that I've benefited from them.
Right. I mean, I enjoy several, VSO groups. I mean, I guess maybe several might be a bit too expansive.
But you've enjoyed more than one.
More than one. Actually, in fairness, I've more background enjoyed a couple. I don't participate in a lot of the musical groups, but I enjoy music a lot. I play a little bit in my free time. So the fact that we have several a cappella groups that I can occasionally go see a show, I mean, that makes me happy. I enjoy having that on campus, and it brings a certain sense of community to the people who are involved with it. I mean, political groups, which I tend to participate in more, also have quite a sense of community. I do think that there is community on campus for people who want to get it, and students have a reasonably high amount of, autonomy in forming and finding those communities. So, I mean, on some level, it's just up to the students to go out and put themselves out there, because the more we sort of talk this out, the more I think the university actually has a lot of good programs in place for preventative care. I mean, I guess the final thing would be physical and mental health are linked. So if you're in bad physical condition, that can affect your mental condition as well. So that would just be an extension of the previous conversation, just take care of yourself physically, and mentally things will fall. I mean, I can say that my mental state varies wildly based on the amount of sleep I get or how hungry I am. You ever see that commercial, have a Snickers bar, which you shouldn't do, but you're not you when you're hungry.
Yeah.
So eat something healthy. Exercise.
Maybe
get some sun.
Maybe, I don't know, have a PB&J sandwich even would be better than a Snickers bar. But yeah, have something. Keep yourself obviously well enough fed, well enough slept, hydrated.
I mean, I would just read basic Epicurus stuff. The guy figured it out 2,500 years ago. If you want to be happy, do some sort of productive work that you can be proud of. Have a circle of friends that you can do things you enjoy with, and eat well and be healthy. That's the life. That's DJ Trump's life hack to happiness that he can't even claim origination for.
Yeah, I think also more broadly, we need to remember that beyond what the university's already doing, the only other things I can really think of are slight expansions of what we already do, or pretty invasive, concerning things. We could do an algorithm. We could do mandated quarterly or even yearly check-ins for mental health. But do we really want that? I would submit no. I don't want that. I don't want to have this kind of Orwellian attitude toward mental health. I think
it's worthwhile to explore why people do, though. And I think there's a lot of benefits that come with personal responsibility, because, if you're responsible for something, you can change it. But at the same time, if you're responsible, that also means you're at fault if there's something wrong. And that's something that a lot of people have trouble with. Like if you're 50 pounds overweight, for example, use a more physical, concrete example, like that's because of your decisions. And if you know that and you're willing to admit that, there's a certain amount of guilt and pain that comes with it. So it's much easier to force that guilt and pain on somebody else. So like with mental health, the same way, it's a lot easier to just look at the university and say, you're not doing enough, rather than saying, I'm not taking good care of myself. There's a lot of problems. I haven't been managing my time very well in my social life. I've been getting behind in my courses. And I have issues with my family that I'm not sorting out. Like, those are all things that can cause mental stress, but they're mostly on you. But if you're not willing to admit that, you're not going to solve the problem, but you can at least avoid the short-term pain and guilt of recognizing that it was, in fact, your fault.
Oh, I agree. I also think that, kind of on a related note, in a more extreme case, when you come up with things like suicides, people never want to even mention that the person who committed suicide, as sad as that is, that person made that decision. Like, you can't blame Mark Tessier-Levine. You can't blame Persis Drell. You can't blame the community for not being supportive enough. Like, yes, you can say maybe they should have done a little more, but at the end of the day, they didn't make the decision. They didn't take the pills. They didn't pull the trigger. Whatever.
I would say in like very extreme cases, if you have like a systematic bullying campaign, which is not what happens here.
No. I agree. Yeah, there are times when that can be the case, but in general, I think even in the case of a systematic bullying campaign, you do need to recognize there is some personal agency there.
Yes, they still made the choice.
The issue is no one wants to mention the personal agency. I mean, the issue, and again...
I think, again, some of it might be ideological. I mean, if you believe that people are largely... If you believe the social constructionist viewpoint that people are shaped by their surroundings, then you don't really believe in personal agency as a concept. And a lot of people on this campus don't even accept the first principle of personal responsibility and personal agency.
Of course you don't, and I mean, or they don't. And I would agree, and I think also it's important to see that, like, because you mentioned that it is, it can be painful to recognize that things are your fault, but here's the other thing. I think it's liberating. And
absolutely, yes.
In the case of mental health, it can probably be even more important than in some cases than physical health. Like, imagine believing that you're just doomed to, not even commit suicide, but you're doomed to be sad, you're doomed to be a failure. There's nothing you can do about it.
I mean, that's the kind of mentality that would probably lead you into suicide is the only way out.
Yeah, but imagine you believe that. Can you imagine how horrible that is and how depressing, how demotivating? I mean, yeah, that's not a good mentality. And, far be it from me to blame everybody for whatever situations they're in. I don't know what led them there, but, just for their own good, let's chuck the moral importance of personal responsibility out the window for a moment. Even just for their own good, think of how much more liberating and how much more motivating and how much more enabling it is to, enabling of success it is to say, well, I'm in a bad spot now. There may be certain things that will never be accessible to me, but there are still a whole world out there of things I can do. And I don't have to be as sad or incompetent or obese or, incapable of getting work done or whatever as I am now tomorrow. I can change a little bit tomorrow and then the next day and the next day, and I can be a little bit better.
Right, and I think this is one more thing I'm going to simultaneously throw the other side of bone while trying to make a point, so bear with me for a second.
Yes.
But let's assume, which I think is fair to say, that there are many things in your life that you don't control directly. I mean, maybe not at all. But there are many things that you do control. Let's assume that both sides, like the absolute personal agency and no personal agency, might have some mixture of the truth. Given that, is it more prudent to focus on the things that you are actually having some control over, or to bemoan the things you have no control over? I mean, I would argue that even if you believe that you only control like 10% of your life and 90% is completely beyond your control, you are better served focusing on that 10% that you can actually control, because then you can make your life noticeably better. And I might also argue, based on my experiences and based on the world we live in, considering that we live in like the best time to ever be a human, and most people who are listening to this podcast live in the best country to ever be a human. Stanford is like one of the richest places in opportunity in the entire history of the world. Like, you are in a very good spot. So I'd say if you're a Stanford student, the amount of your life that you don't control, the things that are hurting you, that are beyond your control, are probably like less than 10%, maybe 20% tops of your total life composition. But even if it weren't the case, even if it was a smaller percentage, you are better served focusing on what you can control and change. And I mean, that's always the case. Even if there's only one thing in your entire life that you could make better, you are better served making that better than whining about what you can't control. Because if you can't control, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, that I think it is important. Focus on that one thing. Yeah, and granted, there's almost always more than one thing. But
maybe there's only one thing at a time you can handle. Maybe you're so not undeveloped because you've been taught all your life to not have a personal agency at all.
Well, that, or like on the other hand, to be fair, you could also just have a bunch of really big things that are under your control but that you need to work on. So maybe you can only handle one at a time because they're big, they require a lot of attention, and that's fine. It's just if you can improve even one big thing, that could be noticeably different. And I think the other thing is it can go, for a lot of people, I think self-confidence is an issue here, ironically, even though there are a lot of arrogant people here. I think some of that, there are also, I think, a lot of people who, are a little bit fragile, and some of that's just our generation of people. We've been, sheltered, babied, pampered, and such that there's really never been, people have really rarely been forced to like make decisions for themselves. And the university is no better. I mean, you talk about in loco parentis. I mean, the real issue here is the
emphasis on the loco.
Yeah, the university is essentially like pampering people, I think, to some extent. Even with the mental health things, I do think, it's all about like, oh, poor babies can't make decisions for themselves. They need all this mental health help when, it's really sometimes you have to say, suck it up, buttercup. But in any case, I think one of the ways you can solve that is like, if you can solve one problem in your life, your confidence will improve and you'll realize, hey, I can do this. I'm not, my locus of control will finally be inside me rather than outside of me.
But furthermore, I mean, a lot of these problems are interconnected. So, I mean, they make each other worse, but at the same time, when you solve one, that relieves pressure on the other ones. Like, let's say you have a poor diet and you have no energy. Because you have no energy, you can't manage your time well. You're not getting your work done. You're stressed. And because you're not getting your work done, you're stressed. You don't know where you're going. So let's say all you can focus on is, I'm going to eat a little bit better. So you start eating a little bit better and you have a little bit more energy. So then it's
you
a little bit
more work done.
You get a little bit more work done. You're a little bit less stressed. And it's like this virtuous cycle where it reinforces itself the other way.
And then you can focus a little more on it until you get to the point that you're, satisfied with your diet. And then you can say, well, are there other things that are preventing me from getting work done, or other things I'm stressed about that are independent of my work? And then you can go after that stuff.
But, or maybe focus on your work directly. Like whatever you can most directly attack, you go for that. And very often it'll make the other tasks easier.
Well, I mean, and here's the thing. Obviously, it's never going to entirely go away. You're always going to have challenges. But if you can get it to the point that, one, you're mature enough to be okay with that, and two, you've been able to get the challenges down to a reasonable level, then you don't have to worry about it anymore.
In the words of Internet Dad, clean your room.
Yep, that's true. Clean your room.
Yeah. I think, necessary Jordan Peterson plug after basically cribbing his entire body of work.
Yeah, but I think some of it's just like there's a lot of personal responsibility that has fallen by the wayside. And I mean, it's kind of sad because this university, presumably, most of these people are going to have the opportunity at least to go on to do interesting things, to succeed, whatever. It's just rather sad to see a lot of people here, piss away their opportunities on, oh, woe is me, my life is so tough, when really it's, one, it's not, and two...
I mean, historically speaking, your life is absolutely charmed. Let's not...
Yes. Well, and also, like, more important, I mean, even compared to other people today, most people today in Stanford have a pretty good time of things. But also, independent of that, even if you have challenges, whatever they may be, and some people here probably have some pretty serious challenges, it's not as though most of these challenges aren't something you can at least ameliorate. You can definitely, in most cases, make things better. Maybe not a lot better even. I mean, yes, there are always things you can't control, but just pick the things you can, and then you've done your best. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the issue is, again, just childishness. It's this, I'm a bit... I mean, think of, like, leftists in general. It's like, they expect not to be told things they don't want to hear because they don't think they can handle it.
I mean, that's a pretty damning statement about your own character, I mean, for one thing.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think, like, that's another problem. I think this is a lot of a leftist culture thing as well, is this idea, we demand mental health. It's like this is welfare for them. From the university rather than the government, but it's welfare.
And it doesn't make much sense because they pay the university. A
lot of these people don't pay, though, keep in mind.
Yeah. Well, I guess...
About half of people are on financial aid of some level, to some degree.
I mean, that's true. And I guess also, comparatively speaking, it's a smaller fraction that's getting student loans that they're going to have to pay off eventually.
Yeah, I would say, though, that just in any case, I think there is a level of entitlement, particularly on the left, that pushes for all this mental health stuff. And again, it's because they believe that they don't believe in personal responsibility. And I think that it damages them, but it also hurts the rest of us. like one of the things I'll close out with on this first hour of our show is that I think we need to think about also the externalities of what you're doing. When you're moaning about mental health, when you're sitting here talking about how terrible things are, think about the people who maybe have issues or are managing issues and are successfully managing them. But when you keep talking about it, do you think that makes it easier for them?
Right. Also, another thing that's more newsworthy. I mean, this is obviously incredibly important philosophically, but looks like, according to the New York Times, the Chinese infection toll has jumped up to officially 2,700, and there are at least 80 deaths, and it looks like there are a couple more cases in the United States. So the coronavirus situation does seem to be intensifying. And I mean, I happen to be of the opinion that the situation in Wuhan is probably a lot worse than 2,700. But,
yeah, probably.
Yeah, we're going back to where we started. Looks like that's pretty serious.
Yeah.
And also that China warns that the virus can spread before symptoms are visible, so that's always wonderful.
Yeah, that's great. I think that we honestly would be wise to close our borders to China for the foreseeable future. No Chinese immigrants, or no Chinese coming in and out.
All right, we already had the immigration debate, man.
Well, no, I mean, this isn't just about immigration. This is even about people traveling.
I know, it's just a travel. Like, we have a temporary travel ban.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
before somebody in the Ninth Circuit shuts it down.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it would be good to have at least significant travel restrictions, because this is not something we want to be dealing with.
Right, and I don't know. There are very few issues that you can get any kind of consensus on in the United States. I do think, like, closing down travel temporarily in order to prevent the spread of a deadly infectious disease might be one of them.
I would hope.
Yeah.
I don't even know. Well, let's just hope that it is, because honestly, there's not much we can do if we can't even control our own borders to the extent that it takes. Yeah.
Speaking of which, this is one moment that should have been more of a unity thing, but I think maybe I'm exaggerating the extent to which it wasn't, but this is also something that was in the news recently. I think the day this is being recorded, not the day that this is airing, Kobe Bryant died, apparently. He died in a helicopter crash outside of Los Angeles with his eldest daughter, and it's obviously a national tragedy. I mean, I don't follow sports at all. I mean, even I had just heard by cultural osmosis that he was one of the all-time greats, and I mean, he was admired by a great many people. He left behind, a family. I assume he did also a lot for his community, and I guess, like, in the aftermath, as one might expect, the president, who to some extent acts as sort of like the ceremonial representative of the entire nation, reached out and, apologized and offers condolences to the family. And people were jumping on him immediately. Like, I just lost a lot of faith in, like, the decency of people. Like, because Kobe Bryant had also had a couple of political disagreements with President Trump during his life. But that's not what this moment was about. This moment was like, I'm sorry that somebody who was really important to a great number of people has passed away. And, like, we can't even have that be a neutral thing anymore. Like,
yeah, I think the issue that I have here is that also we have to consider, like, let's think about what Kobe Bryant would have thought. Like, let's say he knew he was going to die someday. I mean, yeah, obviously he knew he was going to die. But, I mean, even, let's say, he knows he's going to die, whatever. Do you think, like, before he died, he would have thought, well, yeah, I definitely want people to get angry when the President of the United States, even somebody I don't approve of, offers his condolences? I don't think he would have. I think that, I mean, again, I don't know, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Think he probably would have agreed with the same thing. Let's say it had been another basketball player, somebody whom Kobe Bryant had known, who had died, someone of similar stature, and Trump offers his condolences. Do you think Kobe Bryant would have pounced on him? I don't think so.
Right, because, I mean, there are some things that shouldn't be political issues. Like,
well, and also, I think, like, there's no reason to believe in this particular case that Trump wasn't being, genuine. I think that there's no reason to believe that, and you shouldn't generally pounce, but I would get it a little more if there was some evidence he wasn't being genuine, but I don't think that you can criticize someone's, personal views and personal being, really, without denying their humanity. And I think that Trump was particularly trying to recognize very clearly the immense tragedy, not just to the, people who admired Kobe Bryant, but also just to his family and to him. I think it's important to know.
Lost the father and eldest daughter. Like, that's a serious blow. I mean, I guess what really grates me about it, among all, like, aside from the fact that you're turning something that should have just been, like, come together and everybody mourn for, like, this common loss of humanity into partisan hackery. Like, if there had been a dispute between Trump and Bryant, which there were, like, I find it particularly disgusting when somebody attacks when someone is approaching under flag of truce, essentially. Like,
yeah, I mean, I think that's... I mean, it's definitely an immature move, and I think that all the people who got angry at this showed that they're a bunch of childish, wieners. I mean, quite frankly.
Right. I mean, I was also a little bit distressed. I don't spend much time on social media, partially because of like down scrolling and seeing what people respond to President Trump's tweets. But on top of that, I also had a friend of mine have me look over their Facebook post about the Covington kids, and I was very surprised to see half of the comments were, "Oh, I hate the Covington kids." Like, I thought we were over this. I thought we had established as pretty unequivocally that the media did not give them a fair shake a year ago.
Well, and that they never did anything other than smile when a bunch of adults treated them despicably. This Native American,
But apparently that constitutes elder abuse, smirking at a Native American elder. And
well, he was, I mean...
They should be terrified to come back to my house.
And here's the other thing. Let's, and we'll have some context in a moment, or we'll have a couple announcements, but... An elder. So does that mean that an old white person is a white elder? Does that mean an old black person is a black elder? Since when do Native Americans get to have the special elder status and the rest of us don't?
I mean, I don't want to... I'll make the devil's advocate case for a moment. In a lot of Native cultures, the elders were considered like political and cultural leaders. So there's a certain status that came with that didn't come to the same degree. In all cultures to some extent, like we admire people who make it to an old age, particularly in harder times when it was much rarer to even live that long, and showed certain wisdom just to be able to hack it for 70 years and not die.
Yeah,
but
well,
I did.
Yeah. On that note, I think it's time to note that it is 2 p.m. This is KZSU 90.1 FM. This is Shellshocked with DJ Trump having me on as a guest, and I'm George.
And I've outsourced all the announcements to him as well, because that's how I run my business.
Yeah, let's have some announcements. Yeah, DJ Trump. Worldwide Orphans Foundation seeks to transform the lives of orphan children and help them become healthy, independent, productive members of their communities and the world. Programs differ according to a country's specific needs, but often include centrally located community-based healthcare services, education for orphans and caregivers, and enrichment activities such as participation in sports or day camp. To learn more, volunteer, or make a donation, visit wwo.org. That's wwo.org. Starkey Hearing Foundation. Imagine if you couldn't hear me right now or enjoy KZSU's music. Disabling hearing loss affects about 48 million Americans and more than 466 million people worldwide. Yet many do not have access to hearing devices. Starkey Hearing Foundation brings understanding among people through healthcare. The foundation gives away more than 175,000 hearing aids every year. To meet its goals, it depends on generous donations from people like you. If you're interested in learning more, visit starkeyhearingfoundation.org. That's starkeyhearingfoundation.org. KZSU on your iPhone. Want to take KZSU with you everywhere you go? Now you can. Just say, "Hey Siri, play KZSU 90.1 FM" to your phone. It's that easy to show your love and stream everything in Stanford, from our exclusive sports broadcast to our music library featuring tens of thousands of albums, many not heard anywhere else. Keep Stanford Student Radio close at hand with the help of your iPhone and KZSU's 24/7 stream, and thanks for listening.
I would just like to point out that the Hey Siri and the promo actually activated my Siri. I find that deeply amusing.
Yes. In any case, I think it's we should definitely take into account the the creepiness of that, the amusement, whatever you want to say about the fact that Siri doesn't even need to have a button pushed. But in any case, we can finish up that point. Yeah, I think that elders. I mean, I agree. I respect elders. I also think, though, elders do have to earn respect. They have to act maturely. Part of, to me, what's important about an elder is that an elder is assumed to have a certain level of maturity. And that so-called Native American elder had no maturity. He lied about his Vietnam service. The media continued to lie about his Vietnam service. He didn't actually go to Vietnam. He was just a mechanic here in the U.S., which, again, is an honorable thing to do, but you need to be honest about people's service because you don't want to denigrate the service of those who actually went over to those wretched jungles and were exposed to Agent Orange, were often prisoners of war, all those sad things.
Right. One more thing, though. I think that those are all incredibly valid points. They were so valid that I kind of want to plug your show as well because we need to get a second PSA.
Yeah.
Right, a promo, I should say. So if you like George, I would check out The Vanguard. That airs from 7 to 8 on Thursdays. I mean, at other times as well, sometimes when we can
7 to 8 a.m. 7 to 8 in the morning, yes.
Did I say p.m.? Or?
No, you didn't say.
7 to 8, okay, a.m.
Yeah.
I should have specified.
Yes.
So yeah, George is there. He's great. I'm there sometimes too. So.
Yeah, and I sometimes join for the regular play program, Shellshocked, which is 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., so right after my show on Thursdays. So sometimes I join DJ Trump for that. So in any case, yeah, we should plug both of those normal shows because this is a good special, but again, not a normal time. But yeah, I think it's important to remember what I just said, and also to say, because remember, the Native American guy wasn't even the
Nathan Phillips, for us.
Nathan Phillips, yeah, he wasn't even the main show here. The real person who should have been, or people who should have been pilloried were the Black Hebrew Israelites, who were yelling things like, and I quote, "Your president is a homosexual." And
not that there's anything wrong with that.
Well, I mean, again,
the Seinfeld reference.
Again, it's Seinfeld reference, but yeah, I mean, in any case, they were harassing the Covenant kids, and again, the Covenant kids took it all very well, and the Native American guy, Nathan Phillips, just got in their faces, was very aggressive. I mean, to me, here's the thing: these are all adults, and because they happen to be adults of color, they're allowed to act like children and still given the moral high ground. Think about that for a second. In any other context, particularly with both blacks and Native Americans, think of the history of treating them as children in the United States. It is not a pretty one. The black people in the United States were often, especially in the time of slavery, considered half savage, half child. And for example, Native Americans, some of the horrendous treatment, Meriwether Lewis addressed even the chiefs, these elders, who, maybe we should respect them, right? He addressed them. He would always start off his speeches to them. He'd start them off children, calling them children, because he thought that they just were not capable mentally of being adults. So I think we need to realize that the fact that we're giving these people the moral high ground because of their ancestry and, taking away the, I think, justified level of innocence you can give to a child or, someone under the age of 18, it really harms everyone involved. It doesn't allow the white kids just to be kids, because these were white students, they happen to be. And again, they were a little childish, but they certainly didn't really do anything particularly wrong.
They wore a MAGA cap and they weren't sorry about it. That's what the media
and they took a lot of abuse from these older people, and they handled it fairly well. And on the other, so on the one hand, you're not extending them the understanding of being kids, and they honestly didn't do anything wrong anyway, but they especially should be given that understanding. But on the other hand, they were, you're essentially infantilizing the Black Hebrew Israelites and that Native American elder, Nathan Phillips. The issue is you're perpetuating, ironically, I mean, if you believe that somehow what they did is okay, you're perpetuating the stereotypes that we've worked centuries to eliminate. And I think that it's unfortunate that the left seems to buy into a lot of the stuff that they claim to oppose. But yeah, I mean, this proves that CNN and all of its affiliates infantilize black people and infantilize Native Americans.
I mean, CNN did have to settle a pretty massive racial discrimination suit, and they had to settle the Nick Sandman case. I don't know how much they had to pay, but they settled it, and that's going to give him a pretty good war chest going after the other media firms that slandered him, so I wish him the best in that.
Yeah, this ought to be fun to watch. But yeah, I think it's a good way to finish that up. Another matter I think would be good to discuss. We need to discuss before we discuss Peach Mints, which is I think will be the crown jewel of this broadcast. We need to discuss the 50th District of California. So the 50th Congressional District is in the San Diego area, and the incumbent congressman, or who recently resigned, Duncan Hunter, he pled guilty to misuse of campaign funds. He had also been charged with wire fraud and other, financial crime. So that guy needed to go, let's be honest. He was a fraud. But now there's a race to replace him. He wasn't even polling well in the top two primary, even before he ended up taking the plea deal. He's definitely not going to make it. So we need to look at the Republicans who are running, because, quite frankly, the Democrat who's running, Amar Kampanjar, is a terrible candidate, terrible policy positions, not somebody who belongs in Congress. But in any case, let's look at some of the Republicans who are running. So the two main Republicans are former Congressman Darrell Issa of the 49th District. So he retired in 2018 because he knew he was facing a tough race, and now he's running again the 50th District, which is next to it.
I will say this. I mean, if he could have held on in 2018, we would have really appreciated that. Leaving at that particular cycle was rough.
No, well, I'll tell you why he did. So I think he left. Well, I'll finish by saying who the other candidate is. The other one is Carl DeMaio, who I think was a city councilman, maybe. He was somebody significant at one point in San Diego. He also has a radio show there. He ran for Congress in 2014 in the 52nd District and lost narrowly because of a Me Too claim that seemed to play on the fact that DeMaio is homosexual. So someone spuriously, and it was later, again, proved to be a false accusation, claimed that he had sexually harassed a male staffer of somebody's. But in any case, yeah, I agree. It would have been nice if Issa had held on. However, he barely won in 2016, and his district was moving far left. I think he just realized that it wasn't worth his time. I mean, he is rich, so he could have poured a bunch of money into it, and he might have held on. He probably wouldn't have, because the guy who's running, his challenger was rich too. Another thing is, like, it was a really bad year for Republicans. I guess the best he could have done is maybe waste a bunch of Democrats' money keeping it, but he was also, I think, people, you know, he had just been there a long time, and sometimes people want to change, you know? So I think that he was not necessarily the best candidate to run. But what really needed to happen is we should have got a top two such that we had two Republicans take the slot and lock the Democrats out, but we did not strategize well enough to make that happen. So that's the California Republican Party's fault more than anybody. But yeah, sure, it's a little odd that he retires, and then he runs to another district to run. Yeah, I'm a little uncomfortable with that as well. But if you look at DeMaio, he's far worse, and Issa is at least a solid, reliable, normal Republican. Not perfect, not anything special, but decent.
So he is a decent Republican.
He is. Yes, he is a decent Republican.
I'm sorry, I had to go for that. It's the low-hanging fruit.
No, good for it. Good job. But yeah, I mean, he was a good attack dog against Obama. He was an attack dog against, like, a lot of the, I'm pretty sure that Benghazi stuff, IRS, etc.
I think he was also involved with the Eric Holder stuff, holding him in contempt of Congress, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. I mean, he was a very useful member of Congress in that regard. He was a thorn in Obama's side, and for justified reasons. Because, again, you know, the Fast and Furious, for example, was a very flawed program, and there needed to be some accountability for that. Because, again, we effectively just gave guns to a bunch of cartels and enabled them to commit far more crimes than they would have otherwise. But and also, you know, he's got the, I won't say he's particularly great about, you know, the deficit or, you know, particularly exceptional in most of the other places, but, you know, he's pro-life. He had 100% rating from the National Right to Life Committee, 0% rating from Planned Parenthood. He's pro First and Second Amendment. He's pro-wall. He's pro, you know, immigration reform, meaning actually addressing the fact that we are too loosey-goosey with immigration policy. He's opposes sanctuary cities, you know, the traditional Republican platform. And I think that's what we want. DeMaio, on the other hand, in the past was pro-environmental, you know, silly eco policies. Even today, he says he considers Roe versus Wade to be settled law, so I think that's unacceptable on its own. And he seems to be running on a campaign of all talk, no action. Like, his biggest thing recently was tried and failed, but I mean, to his credit, he tried something good, which was to get gas tax repeal, but that didn't work out. But, you know, that, again, he's somebody who you know, he just doesn't really strike me as conservative, really, and certainly is not pro-life, which I think is a critical problem with him. He doesn't belong in Congress. So, yeah, I think that I would encourage people to consider, if you're in the 50th district or if you know anything about it, do some research. I can tell you I would support Issa. That's my view on things.
Okay. I don't really have much to add to that conversation, to be honest. I mean, I think you summed up the candidates fairly well. I wish I could provide more data, but at the same time, I tend to focus more on national or ideological politics. I mean, local races are important. You should absolutely know your local races. I know my local races pretty well. My home district is a pretty safe Republican one, so I try and focus on, while the congressional races and the senatorial races are incredibly important, and the gubernatorial races are incredibly important, you know, you have to pay attention to your local elections because that's a feeder for higher level elections, and on top of that, it also sets a lot of local policy at your home. So I would recommend everybody listening to know your local politicians, know who's running for all your offices to the best of your ability, and, you know, listen to qualified people like George talk about districts, because he follows a lot of districts outside of just his own. So I think he's a relatively good person to listen to for issues like this.
Okay, that sounds good to me. Yeah.
Yeah, of course it would.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I will say I definitely do try to pay good attention to things. So I'd say that in general, just pay attention. Listen into my show. Listen to the Vanguard. Also listen to Shellshocked. We'll be discussing a lot of these issues. With the Vanguard especially, I think we'll have a lot of these issues discussed as the elections get closer. And just to remember the primary for California, the top two is March 3rd, I think. So, yeah, just be listening because we will have something to say about that. But,
all right, actually, this is more of a plan for a future broadcast. Do you think it would be interesting to try and put together district by district, or at least the ones we think are winnable, endorsements? Like, are we allowed to do that precisely?
Oh, so on our radio shows, we can't really endorse anybody, but I will definitely inform you guys. I'll tell you guys my opinions. You guys,
we should just do a breakdown of the competitive districts.
You can do with that what you will. Yeah, we can definitely do something like that. And
that's
so
fair.
Listen into the Vanguard because that's where that probably will be.
Okay, so do what we just do constitute an endorsement? It's like, well, we would prefer ISA over DeMaio, but you guys can do whatever.
Yeah. Let's go for it, guys. Yeah.
We do have to pussyfoot around it a little bit.
Yeah, listeners, to be clear, we do not endorse anyone, at least in our capacity as radio hosts. However, we can tell you what we think, and you can do with that as you will. But I think, without further ado, I think it's time to talk about...
Peach mints!
Yes, it's time to talk about some peach mints.
Oh, my God. The sweet sensation that's gripping the nation and wasting everyone's time.
Yes, absolutely. So what do we have to say about peach mints, DJ Trump?
Okay, so after rushing impeachment through the House, despite not going through the proper procedures and waiting long enough, and despite getting no Republican support and hemorrhaging some Democratic support, Nancy Pelosi held on to the articles for almost a month.
And she thought she was being slick, but of course then...
She had no leverage.
The Senate said, you're holding on... You can't have leverage with something that we don't want in the first place.
Right, it's like you're threatening us to make us do something we don't want, otherwise you're going to do something we don't want you to do.
Yeah.
It's like... Wait, actually, no, that sounds too intelligent. It's like, I won't do this thing you don't want me to do unless you do something that you don't want to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so...
That's effectively how it worked.
Eventually she caved, but now they're trying to intimidate the Republicans into running the trial their way, despite the fact that they had full control in the House, and they handled it horribly. I mean, if I may draw a parallel for those of you who are more familiar with the university system, imagine that impeachment was like writing up a paper and getting sources and citations for your arguments. The Democrats have effectively come to the TAs in the Senate and said, here's our paper. If you don't find more sources for us, you're a bigot. And if grade my paper.
Yeah, give me an A. Yeah, exactly. It's a very immature way of handling things.
My God. It's so obnoxious. So, yeah, that's essentially what's going on. They had the right to call as many witnesses as they want. But they'll say, but DJ Trump, your namesake wouldn't let them interview as members of the executive branch. That's called executive privilege. It's allowed. And if they wanted to challenge it, they could have gone for the courts. But no, they decided to, instead of going for the usual process, decided to just make it an impeachment charge for the president to lawfully use his executive privilege and executive powers. I guess that's not allowed anymore.
Well, I think what's funny about that is essentially if they had gone through the courts and then he had lost, okay, that's one thing, and then they can use it as an impeachment charge. The other thing is they're just making it into an impeachment charge anyway. So when the Senate predictably strikes it down, they're essentially going to be evaluating what the House said anyway. So this ought to be interesting.
Right. I mean, the two charges, one of which is bogus, as we just established. The other is, I mean, so nebulous as to be almost nonsense. Like abuse of power.
Yeah, I don't know what that's supposed to be.
I know. I mean, obstruction of Congress and abuse of power, but obstruction of Congress was nonsense. Abuse of power, I think it might, in some sense, it might refer to the Ukrainian actions. That's ostensibly what all this is about, despite the fact that they wanted to impeach President Trump since before he even took office. But they don't really have anything. Like, even if all their allegations are true, like, even if President Trump withheld aid, despite the fact that he sent aid to the Ukraine 11 days earlier, I believe.
Yep.
And even if he did plan to fire Yovanovitch, which I guess is an issue somehow, the president deciding who he wants to be the ambassadors and wanting to implement his own geopolitical strategy over that of an established body.
Yeah.
I guess like that's somehow controversial, despite the fact that the president, with the unitary executive theory, controls the entire executive branch, no questions asked. Like, who is making these decisions, it's very obvious, to me at least, that they're just trying. They are just trying to damage his prospects for the 2020 election because all of their candidates are imbeciles.
Yeah, that much is obvious.
Yes, but I mean, the entire establishment media is running cover for them, which they always do. But I mean, it's getting even more egregious by the day.
Yeah, I agree. It's getting to be really a joke more than anything. It's just odd to me that this is somehow, oh, well, we're defending democracy. It's like, screw democracy. If democracy means we're getting rid of due process, getting rid of what makes us American, then I don't care about so-called democracy. And we're also a republic, for the record, anyway. So.
Oh, you're so democratic that you're going to remove a candidate like 6 months before an election and deny the American people the right to make that choice.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, and also, like, for just dumb reasons, for things that don't really apply.
I know. I mean, like, he's not an imminent threat to the Republic, no matter what you claim. And if people don't like the way he's running things, they have the opportunity to remove him. But he hasn't done anything explicitly unconstitutional. I don't think he's even really edged in that direction, despite your, prevaricating to the contrary.
Yeah, despite making every effort to push him to do something unconstitutional by tempting him with your own constitutionally questionable actions, he actually hasn't done anything problematic yet.
I know, and what's particularly ironic is Congress is abusing its power in order to advance its own political agenda because the democratically controlled House is trying to undermine the Republican president for no reason other than they don't like him as a person, and they don't like his politics, and they think it will suit their electoral advantage in order to, impeach him, to tar his legacy, to make him look like a weaker president, and to run on it. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, this is all about basically...
It's exactly what they're accusing Trump of doing.
Yeah, basically this is all about electoral advantage for them. There's real... because for one thing, multiple Democrats even said in public that they think that if he is not removed from office by their means, he will win re-election, and they're so afraid of that. Yeah, if you really believe in so-called democracy or little r Republican government, whatever it is, you cannot honestly believe that this is the best way to proceed.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm going to see if I can pull up some quotes. Maybe I can't get the exact one. But I find this particularly hilarious. The Democrats are guilty on both charges of what they accuse Donald Trump of doing because, number one, they're abusing their power by, taking a constitutional responsibility and using it for nakedly political and partisan gain. And then, on the other hand, what do you think Nancy Pelosi was doing? She was holding on to those articles for a month?
Yeah, she was totally doing things.
Obstruction of Congress.
Yeah, she was obstructing the other House of Congress.
From doing it explicitly. It's like, I'm not going to give you the articles so you can begin the trial until you do what I want you to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a meme, to be honest. I mean, it's really sad.
Oh my God. It's like these people have no self-awareness.
They have no self-awareness. That much is obvious.
Oh God, I can't breathe.
Yeah, I agree. This is beyond ridiculous.
All right, so yeah, I don't know where else to take that. I feel like impeachment has been pretty well dissected. I mean, I do know, if we want to just pick on people in the media, apparently George Stephanopoulos, the Clinton associate who is now working at ABC, I believe. I don't want to get that detail wrong.
Yeah.
Apparently, cut off Jay Sekulow during the broadcast of the Trump defense. Jay Sekulow is Trump's personal lawyer, for those who aren't paying attention. He was caught on tape, doing the cut over the neck, cut the tape.
Yeah.
Partially because I don't think he wanted people to hear the defense, maybe? I mean, that's the argument that people have been making. But, I mean, everybody in the media was broadcasting the entire Democratic speech, pretending that Adam Schiff is suddenly a serious person.
Yeah.
Shifty Adam Schiff.
Shifty Adam Schiff has no...
Little Adam Schiff.
Adam, yeah.
I do enjoy a lot of Trump's nicknames for these people. I do miss a certain level of civility in our politics, but at the same time, I think Trump is a counterpuncher, and he's a brilliant counterpuncher. So, given the amount of crap he gets, I think that he has a very well-calibrated response. So, I mean, I very much enjoyed all of his nicknames to the Democrats. I'm going to see if I can get the Trump tweet of the week up, where he just describes Trump. I think he called AOC dumb as a rock, which is just, the best thing I've ever heard about her. I mean, I've heard occasionally coherent, occasional cortex is fun.
Yeah. That, I think, is... That is a solid nickname for her. Occasional Cortex. I mean, it's so true. Like, she just does not seem to really be great at strategy. I mean, if she really wanted to accomplish what she wanted to, what claims to want to accomplish, there are a lot better ways to do this.
Okay, so essentially he's plugging his lawyers with this one, but here's the Trump tweet of the week. Our case against lying, cheating, little Adam Schiff, Shifty Schiff, crying Chuck Schumer, nervous Nancy Pelosi, their leader, dumb as a rock AOC, and the entire radical left, do-nothing Democratic Party starts today at 10 a.m., and this was yesterday. He was just tweeting out, like, I listen to my lawyers defend me on, but I do enjoy the nicknames. I think that's something that's...
Oh, the nicknames are all kinds of fun. they are just so fun, and it is very hard not to enjoy them.
Right. So, I mean, I think Trump needs to be less rude to rocks. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know if... I think that's one of the difficulties with insulting Democrats is because I can't think of anything worse to call someone than a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you say they're as dumb as a rock, or if you say, like, if you call them children, it's like, stop belittling children.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, children deserve better. They don't deserve to be associated with that.
Right. So, I mean, I think that's a pretty serious problem, that nobody's taking this impeachment particularly seriously. No one's paying attention. We all know what's going to happen. Romney might be talking about, oh, well, maybe we need witnesses, and a couple Republicans might want to create some drama for the sake of creating drama. But they're not going to get 20 Republican defectors to get the 67 threshold to remove Trump from office. They're probably not even going to get a majority of people to try and remove him from office.
Yeah, I mean, so let's say that all of the three main people who might want to remove Trump from office, basically Romney, Murkowski, and Collins, let's say all of them voted to remove him from office. Even then, they would be at 50-50, assuming that everyone votes and nobody else votes differently. And then Pence would break that tie, ironically. But even then, I mean, I think there are a couple Democrats who might not be comfortable voting to remove him from office. I could definitely see Doug Jones breaking ranks. It's possible.
Oh, he's up for election.
Well, the thing is,
if he votes to impeach Trump, he's
toast anyway, so I don't think that really is going to affect him. I just don't really think he could be one for various reasons, just not to really want to go down that road. Also, Joe Manchin might not vote to remove him from office. And
he was reelected in 2018. He might have some insulation.
Well, no, he has insulation. I just don't know that he actually would want to do it. Like,
yeah, I mean, it might be.
He strikes me as the type who might just not really. He might just think this makes me feel dumb. Like, keep in mind, when you're just like that, when you're just reelected, or if you're in Doug Jones's case where you're going to lose probably no matter what, you're going to do what you feel like. It's just that what they feel like may not be to remove him from office, if that makes sense.
Right, and even if he's politically insulated, that'd be a pretty major hit that he might not gain anything.
Well, keep in mind
if he's not going to be impeached anyway.
Joe Manchin's probably not running for re-election. Keep in mind, he's an old guy. He's probably retiring. So so he especially can do pretty much whatever he wants. I just could honestly see him making the decision that I don't want my legacy to be tarred with this.
Okay, this is somewhat tangential, but just looking over the headlines, apparently on Sunday, January 26th, apparently 3 rockets hit the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. I can't see if there's been any injuries, and it's not immediately apparent who the assailants were. It seems that there's a lot of anti-government protests going on in the country, and there's a lot of controversy in Iraq because, of course, it's Iraq. There's a lot of sectarian tension and political tension.
Yeah.
None of them have been claimed, but Washington has repeatedly blamed Iran-backed military factions in Iraq. So,
Yeah.
One person was wounded, according to a senior Iraqi official, but it's not immediately clear how serious the injuries were and whether or not the person was an American national. So, monitoring that situation very closely. Obviously, at the beginning of the year, there was some controversy with an assault on the U.S. Embassy that resulted in us killing Soleimani and briefly chanting the bomb, 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 Iran little mantra. I know, like in John McCain flashbacks here, folks.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I hope that this doesn't escalate too soon. I did hope that when we took out the leader of their basic terrorist operations, that they would calm down a bit, and maybe they have. But might as well watch this, see how it goes.
Oh, I agree. I think that we do not want a war with Iran. Now, if we're forced to get into it, we're forced to get into it, and I think we just need to be ready for it, but that doesn't mean that we should at all want it. I mean, it's not a desirable thing to have, for sure. I mean, wars are expensive. And more importantly, they involve putting our own men and women at risk. And then again, also, I mean, they're not good for the other countries involved. I mean, it's not something that's desirable. If we have to do it, we have to do it. But we certainly should not be aiming for the undesirable outcome.
Right. For another awkward quote, I mean, which pretty neatly summarizes war, and especially war in the Middle East, it's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
Yes.
So, yeah. Necessary prequel reference, but I'm sorry, like occupying or trying to destabilize even like such a large mountainous country with a pretty already religiously radicalized population, that's not...
I will say the population itself isn't terribly radicalized. A lot of people aren't that strong of believers. I think the bigger problem is just that relative
to a lot of the Islamic
Revolutionary Guard Corps is really what you have to worry about.
I know, but I feel like that's enough people. Like we say Iran is less. We say they're less radicalized than a lot of the rest of the Islamic world, but much of the Islamic world is very radicalized.
No, I mean, I would say a lot of Iranians are not super religious. Even it's just, but again, like the Revolutionary Guard Corps is so big that, like, honestly, because the country's population is so big, even a relatively small percentage of the population that's radicalized is a big raw number.
Very problem.
Well, and again, like they also have pretty. I mean, as you mentioned, the mountains are an issue because you can even have small populations cause a lot of problems when it's hard to corner them. And I think that's the issue that we would have with them. Now, is there any doubt that we could win a war with them? No.
I mean, we could probably wreck their entire conventional military within about a week. But I mean, that's not the problem. The problem is long-term occupation, which we might even decide at the get-go is not something.
Well, I was going to say, like, to be honest, I don't think long-term occupation would be the goal. I think the issue would be just demolishing their nuclear facilities. Now, again, like, do I really think we should even want to have to do that in a war? No. Do I think it's inevitable? Almost, in a sense. Like, I think that at some point they will probably do something that makes it impossible for us not to respond. And at some point we will have to physically dismantle their nuclear facilities. But yeah, I think even then we will not want to occupy them long term because, like, what benefit does that do for us?
I mean,
getting rid of their nuclear facilities, I think, is a benefit. It's if we have to go to war with them, that would be a benefit. There's no reason we want to occupy them.
I agree that we should never even attempt to occupy Iran because it would be a massive headache, and we've seen that occupation and regime
and what do we win?
Is not one of our military
Well, the thing
strengths.
is, what do we get out of it? Like, what do we get out of the occupation? Nothing. Like, we have no goal there.
Right. Secondarily, however, I don't think it's entirely inevitable that we go to war on the condition that since we're putting so much diplomatic and economic pressure on Iran right now that eventually if the population just gets sick of it, they might themselves demand change within their government. And I think that's the only way that we're going to avoid a war, but I think that's actually a pretty reasonable outcome. So, I mean, that would be my preference rather than just waiting inevitably for Iran to step a toe out of line and then just smacking them around until they decide to behave like that. That might be a workable solution, but I would prefer to just put them in timeout until they decide to get their act together without having to resort to violence.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Violence is not desirable. I mean, again, like we should, again, use that as a last resort. If diplomacy can get the results we need, then we should just stick with that. It's just that I think I'm a little skeptical that will happen.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah, just a little skeptical.
So we've got a little bit of time left. Want to pivot back to peach mints, or is there any other burning questions?
I think peach mints are actually they're quite tasty. I'd like some more peach mints. Let's chat.
You and all the Democrats in the country. So it does seem to be heavily polarized. There is more support for impeaching President Trump than there was for impeaching President Clinton, which I find intriguing given the fact that Clinton actually committed perjury, whereas Trump doesn't really have any serious crime or any crime whatsoever.
There's nothing. And even to the extent you can argue for one, there's nothing so clear as what there was with Clinton. I mean, Clinton obviously committed perjury. Now, do I really think it would have been fair to remove him from office for that? I think it would have been stupid, but technically there were grounds.
It depends on how you want to define high crimes and misdemeanors. Like, he wasn't using it in the way that traditionally we assign to high crimes and misdemeanors.
Well, I mean, I think we also need to look at, like, there wasn't a real national security threat to him doing that. Now, yes, was it embarrassing? Did it make us look ridiculous? Sure, but I don't think that every time a president makes us look ridiculous and makes a mockery of his office even is necessarily enough to say we should remove him from office automatically for that.
Yeah, we can wait until the next election to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, and he was... I believe he was a lame duck. So
Clinton specifically, yes, yeah. He was a lame duck. I was talking about the general principle.
No, I was going to say he was a lame duck. So we could have just said, okay, serve out your term, and we'll we'll have these hearings to embarrass you, but we won't remove you.
Well, I mean, ultimately, he did lose his license to practice law.
Yeah,
he got disbarred. That's not nothing. Like it was severe enough that he faced serious legal penalties.
And I think that actually is a reasonable, or something reasonable to consider in removing someone from office, like if you've violated something like that. Now, granted, I still think he shouldn't have been removed, but definitely he's closer to what should have been removed than Trump. I mean, Trump has no reason. If they want to remove him from office, they just need to get their people out to vote for a candidate better than Hillary Clinton.
Right, but at the same time, it seems to be, according to the most recent polls I read, 50% of people seem to support his removal, 44% oppose it, 6% have no opinion somehow. I want to meet the 6%.
I mean, to be honest, I'm surprised more people don't have no opinion, because think about it this way. I mean, I guess, sure, those people wouldn't answer the polls, but, like, a lot of people aren't affected day to day by who's president.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I'm going to quote another comedian. I think this one was Louis C.K. It's like, when you're eating bacon, you don't care who the president is. I mean, a lot of people just spend all day eating bacon, I guess, or doing something similar, just, like, living their lives, enjoying themselves. I mean, the government... I mean, to a large extent, like, we're political junkies. I enjoy this subject very much, but in our ideal political system, the government would do very little, and very few people would care who was in charge.
Yeah, I mean, if everyone in charge were committed to following our principles, I mean, yes, there would probably be different ways you could choose to administer the government, and maybe definitely ways that could be better or worse, but at the end of the day, it would not be sort of like an earth-shattering issue who won or lost elections. Unfortunately, today, every election is a choice between tyranny and not, and that's really not a great... It's sad that we have to make that choice every time, when really we'd like to be making a better set of choices.
Right.
We don't have those.
So, yeah, essentially that's it. But what's also particularly interesting is it's almost entirely along partisan lines. Like 81% of Democrats want Trump impeached, and 85% removed, I should specify, and 85% of Republicans oppose it. I think a slight majority of independents are actually in favor of it, according to some polls, which is worrisome to me because, I mean, independents and swing voters will get an opportunity to remove him from office in 2020, which I hope they don't do.
Well, here's what I would say. I think this confirms to us something we already knew about Trump. He's unpopular. He always has been. However, I don't know that he's more unpopular than whoever the Democrats will nominate. So think about this for a second. If whoever the Democrats nominate is probably going to get run through the ringer, even though the media loves them, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to eventually come out. The conservative media at least is going to tar them, and Trump's going to do a number on them. And hopefully the Republican opera research apparatus will screw him over. So here's the thing. The general election is not going to be a referendum on Trump. It's going to be a choice. If they frame it well, and I think Trump and the party and the Republican Party know how to, well, mainly Trump. I don't really trust the party. I think Trump will know how to frame it well, and I think the Republican Party will follow along at least. And if they can frame it as a referendum, Trump has a pretty good shot of winning.
Right. I would say that in Trump's favor, this time he's running on a much more unified Republican Party.
And on a record.
On a record. A pretty good record, I'd say.
Yeah.
I mean, a very good economy. We have no more new foreign wars, despite a couple of dust-ups.
Yeah.
We've actually he's kept a lot of his promises. Job numbers are good. Stock market's going up. Wages are increasing. He's renegotiated several trade deals. I mean, he's even managed to renegotiate a trade deal with China, although it's in the beginning stages. So he's gotten more money from NATO. I mean, most of the things that he campaigned on and he cared about, like, it seems like he's doing a reasonably good job of keeping those promises, which is going to please a lot of his base voters. On top of that, he's actually making inroads with the black community and other minority groups. The polling data is, up and down on this. It could be slight, it could be extreme. But, I mean, he's like one of the first Republicans in decades to actually make a significant play for the black vote. And whether or not that plays out in his favor, I'm not sure. But he's making a play. And that could be a pretty big thing.
I can't imagine. So some argue, well, he's going to definitely do worse with black voters than he did in 2016. I don't think that's the case. I think that he can't. I think that's his bare minimum. And the reason, now, more black voters may turn out, in which case, even if he gets a slightly higher share, just the fact that they're so, strongly Democratic might be a negative for him. But I think in terms of overall vote share, he will improve because, honestly, I think a lot of people who voted for him in 2016 probably will end up sticking with him in 2020, and I think a fair number of people who either voted against him or stayed home or voted third party might see that their lives are probably at least as good as they were before, and that he threatens them with a lot less than the Democratic candidate will in terms of policy proposals and, the things that could impact their lives negatively. Black voters are at least thought to be fairly pragmatic. Now, why that hasn't caused them to leave the Democratic Party, I don't know. But at least within partisan politics, they tend to be the more moderate Democratic voters. They tend to ask their politicians questions like, what have you done for me lately? Yeah, basically. So, I think that if Trump can make that argument that, when he was asking what the hell do you have to lose, that he in fact will say, now you do have a lot to lose if I don't win re-election, because a lot of the benefits that I've been able to give to you in terms of just allowing the economy to grow better and just giving a better environment for you guys, and, are going to go away. And if you vote for me instead of the Democrat, I will actually be able to grow those benefits and, compound upon them. I think that's an argument he can make.
Right, absolutely. And another thing that plays big to his advantage this time is that he has a fundraising advantage, at least at the moment. I think over any particular Democrat. I think Democrats have been outraising him recently as a group, but he's got a massive war chest of over $200 million.
So keep in mind, for one thing, they're going to spend most of that money before. So they're going to have to, he's going to be competing against one Democrat rather than them all, and two, they're going to spend a lot of that money attacking each other. So they're doing some of his work for him. Like, he can just recycle some of those ads. Right.
So that's going to be a very big point in Trump's favor. He won last time despite having a much weaker organization, despite having a lot of Republicans who are for him now against him or on the fence, and, despite having no record to run on whatsoever. But, however, last time he was running against Hillary Clinton, one of the most hated people ever. Like, nobody likes Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, the least popular national, or least popular major party nominee, other than himself. Right. So, he was basically running against somebody who was pretty hard to repeat. However, I think that the Democrats could have a similar problem this time around, because I think they're going to have a lot of bad blood.
So we can go dumber.
I saw some polling recently that suggests that while Biden voters, they were asked, if someone other than your candidate wins the nomination in the Democratic primary, will you vote Democratic in the general election? Biden's voters said almost overwhelmingly yes. Almost a third of Sanders voters said no or depends on the candidate. And, Warren voters were also pretty like Biden's were like, yeah, we'll probably vote for the candidate. I believe about half of Yang voters, or like over 40% said no, and collectively about half said either no or depends on the candidate. And there are some problems. So the Yang base is small, so it's not a huge deal.
It's like 4 to 5%. He's actually, in some polls, he's up there like 8%. He's actually an underappreciated candidate.
I would say Yang's base is not what they need to worry about. They need to worry about it because it's clear there are some people who think that way, but Sanders' base is almost as bad in some ways. And
he's like the number 2 candidate. He's back on the debate stage.
Oh, that's good. But in any case, if Sanders, if even a sixth of Sanders' primary voters, which isn't a huge share of the overall Democratic electorate, because most people aren't probably going to vote in the primary, and he's not even the majority candidate, but even if 6 of them don't turn out in the general election, you could look at what happened in 2016, and you saw that Sanders voters made a lot of the difference. So I think it's important to note that they need to be, Democrats need to be afraid, because if Biden wins, people think Biden is the strongest candidate, but I would argue, and I think there's a strong argument to be said that if Biden wins the nomination, they really can't count on all these voters from other candidates to support him, whereas if Sanders wins, most people will probably get behind him anyway. I think that if Biden wins the nomination, that is a great thing for Trump.
Right, and one last thing that's of great interest. At the time that this program is airing, it'll be Tuesday the 28th, I believe, and the Iowa caucuses are going to be Monday the 3rd of February. So we're finally starting to approach election season for the Democratic candidates, so we're going to see, the rubber hit the road. We're going to see who takes off and who doesn't. So that's going to be a very intriguing process to watch. Also, as an earlier correction, in most recent polls, Yang got 7% and 5% in national polls and 5% in 2 New Hampshire surveys, which qualified him for the next Democratic debate.
Well, good for Yang. I think that ought to be interesting. And since the Democrats care so much about being racially, socially just, they will get their candidate of color on stage.
Right. The way that they treat Asians as people of color is sort of quixotic. They count except for when they don't. See Harvard admissions.
But they've been getting torched, so the poor Democrats will finally have a candidate of color.
And with that, this has been an excellent episode of Shellshocked. Thanks for checking in.
Yeah.
Thanks, George, for helping me out.
Yeah.
And have a wonderful day.
Yep. Thank you very much.